Captain Jacob Cross stood at the entrance of the alien marketplace, his boots clicking softly against the cobblestone path. It was a place that humans were never meant to visit, a forbidden zone under strict orders from his superiors. The shimmering walls of the marketplace stretched before him, their strange, iridescent glow flickering in the alien twilight. Jacob's mission was clear: patrol the outer colonies and report back. No detours, no distractions. But as he walked through the entrance, a sense of unease settled over him, like the air itself was watching him. The market was alive with activity. Brightly colored stalls lined the streets, filled with exotic goods from distant planets, shimmering fabrics, strange spices, glowing crystals. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers and sizzling foods, strange sounds vibrating through the space. There were creatures in every shape and size, some humanoid, others entirely unrecognizable, moving through the crowd in a chaotic dance. Jacob's gaze flicked nervously between the unfamiliar beings, his hand resting on the blaster at his side. He was supposed to observe, not interact, stay invisible, but his instincts, honed over years of training, told him something wasn't right. A sudden hush fell over the crowd. Jacob tensed, feeling the shift in the atmosphere. His heart began to race as a figure stepped out from the shadows, her presence undeniable. The marketplace seemed apart for her, like the crowd instinctively understood that she was someone not to be ignored. She was unlike any alien Jacob had ever seen. Her skin was an otherworldly shade of pale blue, glowing softly under the flickering lights of the marketplace. Her eyes were a piercing violet, deep and hypnotic, as though they could see straight through him. Her long, silver hair cascaded around her shoulders in waves, shimmering like moonlight on water. Her movements were fluid, graceful, almost as though she was gliding across the cobblestones. She didn't walk, she danced. Every step was like a calculated move, as if she controlled the very air around her. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't the kind of man to fall for alien tricks, to get caught up in the seductive allure of the unknown. But there was something about her that pulled him in. Her lips curled into a small, knowing smile, one that seemed to hold secrets, promises, and dangers all at once. As she drew closer, the world around Jacob seemed to fade. He could feel her gaze, intense and magnetic, drawing him in. His heart pounded in his chest, and he found himself frozen in place, unable to look away. She stopped just inches from him, her eyes never leaving his. The crowd continued to move around them, but in this small pocket of the marketplace, it was as though time itself had slowed. The sounds of the market were muffled, replaced by the thrum of Jacob's racing heartbeat. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice tight, his breath quickening. He was a soldier, a man of discipline, of order, but in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. The girl smiled again, a slow, knowing smile that sent a jolt of electricity through him. "I'm someone who knows what you want," she said softly. Her voice was like music, smooth and alluring, yet with an edge of danger that Jacob could feel deep in his bones. He wanted to pull away. He wanted to remind himself of the rules of the mission. But the temptation, the pull of this alien girl, was too much to ignore. "You shouldn't be here," Jacob said, trying to steady himself, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. The words felt foreign on his tongue. They were supposed to be a warning, a command, but they sounded more like a plea. The alien girl tilted her head, her violet eyes shimmering with amusement. "And yet, here you are." She reached out, her fingers brushing against the sleeve of his uniform. The touch was electric, sending a shock wave through him. "You've crossed the line before, haven't you, soldier?" she whispered. "You've already broken the rules. All for just one glimpse of something different." Jacob's breath caught in his throat. How did she know that? How did she know the very thoughts that had been creeping into his mind ever since he arrived? The feeling that there was more to this mission than he had been told. The strange restlessness, the longing for someone that he couldn't explain. And then she said the words that would change everything. "Kiss me. Break the rules." Jacob froze, his heart stopping. The words echoed in his mind, too surreal to grasp, yet too real to ignore. He felt the weight of the moment press down on him. His training, his loyalty to the human race, the mission, they all told him to turn away, to run from this forbidden temptation. But the strange girl in front of him had an undeniable pull, a power he couldn't explain. She was dangerous, forbidden, and yet she was all he could think about. He knew this was the moment, the one that would determine everything. Would he break the rules? Would he take the risk, defy the orders, and give in to the temptation? The air around them grew thick with the promise of something unknown, something powerful, as Jacob found himself teetering on the edge of his own desires. Just one kiss, he thought. One kiss, and nothing will ever be the same. But he didn't know how true that would be. Jacob stood there, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to walk away, to ignore the alien girl standing so close. She was a danger to everything he had been trained for. She was the kind of distraction that could ruin his career, his reputation, everything he had worked for. But no matter how much he tried to focus, his eyes kept returning to her. Her name was Zariah. The moment she spoke it, her voice seemed to wrap itself around him like a warm blanket, soothing yet unsettling. Zariah, a name that sounded like it belonged to someone from ancient legends, as if it held more meaning than mere words could capture. Her eyes, those violet eyes, were fixed on him with a strange intensity, as though she was reading the very core of his being. Her presence was overwhelming, like a force of nature. Jacob felt himself fighting the urge to step closer, to close the space between them. The instinct to remain professional, to follow protocol, to stay in control of his emotions. All of it crumbled under her gaze. It was as if she held some power over him, something that made it impossible to resist. "I am Zariah," she said again, her tone soft, yet laced with a sense of authority that was undeniable. "An outcast among my own kind, a species long lost to time, forgotten by both my people and yours." The words seemed like riddles, cryptic and tangled, but Jacob couldn't help but listen. He had been trained to distrust aliens, to avoid getting entangled with them in any personal way. But there was something about Zariah that made it difficult to remember all the rules. "I don't understand," Jacob muttered, his voice hoarse as he tried to maintain his composure. "What do you mean by outcast? Your species, they abandoned you." Zariah's smile faded just slightly, a flicker of something dark passing through her eyes. "Not abandoned. Shunned," she corrected. "We were once revered, but now we are seen as a threat, a curse. My people live in the shadows, feared by the rest of the galaxy." Her words hung in the air like a weight, heavy with unspoken history. Jacob's mind raced as he tried to process what she was saying. An ancient race, shunned and feared. It sounded like something out of story, not reality. But here she was, standing in front of him, making him question everything he thought he knew. He glanced at her again, and it was impossible not to notice how her beauty seemed to radiate from her, drawing him in like a moth to a flame. There was an aura around her, a kind of grace and elegance that made it hard to breathe. She wasn't just an alien, she was something more, something beyond the confines of his training. "You speak in riddles," Jacob said, trying to regain some semblance of control over his thoughts. "What is it that you want from me?" Zariah took a step closer, and Jacob's breath caught in his throat. Her presence seemed to fill the space between them, making the world feel smaller, as if they were the only two beings left in the galaxy. Her fingers brushed against his arm lightly, sending a jolt of electricity through him. The touch was soft, almost imperceptible, yet it felt like it had seared through his skin, leaving a lingering warmth in its wake. "Why are you really here, human?" Zariah asked, her voice dropping to a whisper, so quiet that Jacob could feel the vibrations in his chest. "Is it just the mission? Or is it something more?" The question sent a chill down his spine. He was a soldier. He was here to do a job. No distractions, no emotions. But standing in front of her, he wasn't sure anymore. His mind swirled with confusion, the weight of his duty clashing with something he couldn't quite understand, a strange, forbidden attraction that pulled him toward her like gravity. "I'm here to observe," "To report," Jacob replied, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. "Nothing more." Zariah's eyes flicked to his lips for just a moment before returning to his eyes, her gaze penetrating, as if she could see through every lie, every shield he had built around himself. "Is that the truth?" she asked softly, her tone almost teasing. Jacob stiffened, his pulse quickening. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and charged, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. He had to step away. He had to remember who he was. But the pull of Zariah was so strong, so overpowering, that it felt like his very soul was being tugged toward hers. "Why are you asking me this?" Jacob finally asked, his voice rougher than he intended. He tried to maintain his focus, but his thoughts were scattered, his mind clouded by the magnetic force of her presence. Zariah tilted her head, her silver hair catching the light as she did. She smiled, but it was not a smile of amusement. It was something deeper, more knowing. "Because I can't feel it," she said, her voice a whisper. "I can feel the conflict inside you, the pull between duty and desire, the rules you've been taught, and the part of you that yearns to break them." Jacob's heart hammered in his chest, the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. She was right. There was something inside him, something he had never experienced before, something that made him want to reach out and touch her, to kiss her, to give in to the temptation. But he couldn't. He was a soldier, a man of discipline. He couldn't afford to let emotions cloud his judgment. He had to stay focused, stay detached. Yet, as he looked at Zariah again, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something had already changed within him. He had been trained to view aliens as enemies, as threats. But here she was, a living, breathing mystery. "Stay away from me," Jacob said, though his voice lacked conviction. Zariah only smiled, her gaze never leaving his. "It's too late for that, human. You crossed the line the moment you set foot in this marketplace." Her voice dropped to a sultry whisper. "Now you're mine, and I'm not letting you go." Jacob tried to shake off the unsettling feeling that had been gnawing at him ever since he met Zariah. His footsteps echoed in the narrow hallways of the human base, but his thoughts were miles away. His duty, his training, everything he had been taught screamed for him to ignore her, to follow the unspoken code that kept humans and aliens at a distance. He was a soldier who had no time for distractions, especially not one as dangerous as Zariah. But the more he tried to put her out of his mind, the more she seemed to haunt him. At first, it was subtle. He would catch a glimpse of her in the distance, her silver hair glinting in the soft glow of the alien world's twin moons. She would vanish before he could get close enough to confront her. But then it escalated. Zariah began appearing in places he least expected, just outside his quarters, in the narrow corridors of the base, and once, even standing at the edge of his patrol route. Her eyes, always glowing with that same magnetic intensity, followed him wherever he went. Jacob tried to ignore her, to convince himself that it was all in his head. But Zariah's presence was undeniable. He couldn't escape it. One night, after a long and exhausting patrol, Jacob sat alone in his quarters. His mind was a blur of orders, mission reports, and images of Zariah. As he lay down to rest, he tried to shut his eyes, hoping for a few moments of peace. But sleep didn't come. Instead, his mind was filled with visions of her, her violet eyes, her soft, hypnotic voice, her touch that sent shivers down his spine. And then, as if summoned by his thoughts, she appeared. She stepped into the room without a sound, her presence filling the space like a storm on the horizon. Zariah was in his quarters, standing in the doorway, as if she had always belonged there. "You can't escape me," she said softly, her voice dripping with a quiet confidence that made his heart race. "You may try to fight it, but you can't hide from what we are, Jacob." He sat up quickly, his pulse pounding in his ears. "What do you want from me, Zariah?" His voice was hoarse, tinged with frustration. He had resisted her for as long as he could, but it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the pull between them. "I want you to see," she said, her voice low and alluring, like the promise of something forbidden. "I want you to understand what you've been blind to." Jacob narrowed his eyes, trying to focus on the conversation, trying to ignore the growing desire he felt every time she was near. I'm not interested in your games. What do you mean, see? Zariah stepped closer, her movements fluid, almost predatory. Her eyes never left his, and Jacob could feel the weight of her gaze, as if she were looking straight through him. The war that's coming, she began, her voice like a secret being whispered between the two of them. You know nothing of what's truly at stake. Humans are blind to the real threat. The Dominion, they're not what you think. They've been manipulating your people, controlling everything from the shadows. But I can show you the truth. I can give you the knowledge you need to change the fate of your entire race. Jacob felt a twinge of disbelief. This was absurd. He had been trained to view aliens with suspicion, especially those like Zariah, an outcast of her kind, living in the shadows, offering secrets that no one had ever dared to share. Everything in his training told him to be cautious, to avoid making deals with those who might have an ulterior motive. But something about Zariah's words rang true. Something about the way she spoke made him feel as though he was missing out on something huge. She was offering him knowledge. Forbidden knowledge. Knowledge that could give humans an edge in the upcoming war. In the heat of battle, in the chaos of survival, knowledge was the ultimate weapon. It was too tempting. Jacob could feel the pull, stronger than before. His mind raced with the possibilities. He had never been one to break rules, never been the type to cross lines. But what if this was different? What if Zariah was telling the truth? What if this was the key to saving humanity? What's the catch? Jacob asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as though the question itself could be dangerous. Zariah smiled, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to shift around them. One kiss, she said softly, her voice so seductive it made Jacob's knees weak. One kiss, and you'll never be the same again. I'll show you the true power of my race, the power to change everything. Jacob's heart slammed in his chest, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. Her words echoed in his mind. One kiss. The temptation was overwhelming. You'll never have to worry about your mission again, she continued, her voice now a whisper, like a soft caress against his skin. You'll have everything you need to win the war, to outsmart the Dominion. And when the dust settles, you'll be able to write your own future. But you have to take the first step. Jacob knew it was a risk, a massive risk. He had no idea what kind of power Zariah was offering, what kind of consequences there would be. But the thought of the power she spoke of, the idea that one simple kiss could change everything, was enough to make him question everything he had believed in. Zariah was right. He had been trained to follow orders, to believe in the rules. But those rules didn't explain everything. They didn't explain the hunger, the desire, the part of him that wanted to break free from the confines of his duty. Why me? He asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. Why are you offering this to me? Zariah's eyes softened, a hint of something deeper flickering in her gaze. Because you're the one who's willing to see the truth. The one who's already taken the first step by crossing paths with me. Fate has already made its choice. Now it's up to you to decide what to do with it. Jacob swallowed hard. The weight of her words pressed down on him. He knew what he had to do, what he wanted to do. But even as the desire to give surged within him, part of him hesitated. There was no going back. One kiss, and his world would change forever. The air was thick with tension as Jacob stood before Zariah, every part of him screaming to walk away, to keep his distance, to hold on to the last shred of his professionalism. But the pull between them was undeniable. She was there, standing so close, her violet eyes intense and knowing, and he was powerless to resist the temptation. Jacob had fought it for days. He had tried to remind himself of the mission, of his duty to humanity. He had told himself that nothing could distract him from his orders, from the path he had been set on. But now, standing in this quiet, dimly lit room, with Zariah mere inches away, all of that seemed distant, irrelevant. You want the knowledge, she whispered, her breath warm against his skin, but it comes with a price that only you can pay. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest, the thundering sound of his pulse drowning out everything else. His mind screamed for him to back away, to do the right thing, but his body didn't obey. He wanted this. He wanted her. The weight of the moment was almost unbearable. Jacob had always been a man of control, a soldier who followed the rules. But now, standing on the edge of a decision that would change everything, the rules felt like chains that had kept him bound for far too long. Zariah's eyes softened, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "You're afraid," she said, her voice gentle yet unwavering. "Afraid of what this kiss will mean. Afraid of what it will cost you." Jacob shook his head, his breath shaky as he tried to speak. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice rough. "I'm afraid of what you're offering me, of what I'll become." Zariah took a step closer, her presence enveloping him. "What you become is your choice. You can continue to hide behind your rules, behind your duty. Or you can take a step into the unknown, where you can truly see the universe for what it is." Jacob's mind spun as she reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek, sending a jolt of heat through him. Every instinct screamed at him to pull away, but it was too late. The connection between them had already been made. The desire, the pull was all too strong. "Just one kiss," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "and everything will change." The words echoed in his mind like a spell, a promise of something more. He had thought about it before, the consequences of breaking the rules, of allowing himself to feel something for an alien. But in that moment, those thoughts faded into nothingness. There was no time to think. There was only the overwhelming need to give in, to feel what it would be like to break free. And then, before he could stop himself, Jacob leaned in. Their lips met with a force that sent a shock through his entire body. The world around them seemed to vanish. The cold, sterile walls of the base, the tension of the mission, all of it disappeared in the heat of the moment. There was nothing but her. Nothing but the feeling of her lips on his, the sensation of her body, so close to his, as though they had been made to be together. The kiss was electric, a spark that ignited something deep within him. But as their lips touched, something even stranger happened. The air around them seemed to shift. The world slowed down. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as his mind was flooded with visions that felt like they weren't his own. Alien landscapes, distant planets bathed in starlight, vast machines of incredible power whirring and humming with energy. He saw creatures that defied explanation, beings made of light and shadow, their forms shifting in ways that made his stomach turn with awe. And then there was Zariah. Her memories, her pain, her loneliness. He saw the way her people had been cast out, how they had been hunted and feared. He felt her grief, her longing for a connection, for a home that had been lost to the stars. He felt the weight of centuries of isolation, the ache of being an outcast in a universe that didn't understand her. It was overwhelming, too much to process. He pulled away, gasping for air, his chest heaving as he tried to regain his composure. His head spun, the memories and emotions still swirling in his mind like a storm he couldn't control. For a moment, he didn't know where he was or who he was. All he knew was that in that single moment, he had learned more than he could have in a lifetime of studying alien texts. The visions, the knowledge had all come flooding in, as though he had been connected to something greater, something older than anything he had ever known. Zariah stood in front of him, her eyes now dark with an unreadable emotion. "You've seen it now," she said softly. "The power of my people. The knowledge that can change everything." Jacob staggered back, his mind reeling as he tried to process what had just happened. He had crossed a line. He had broken the rules, violated everything he had been taught about loyalty, duty, and the separation between humans and aliens. And now, there was no going back. His body still burned from the kiss, the feeling of her lingering on his lips, in his blood. He had given in, and in doing so, he had unleashed something he couldn't control. "You knew this would happen," Jacob said, his voice low, filled with a mix of anger and awe. "You knew I wouldn't be able to resist." Zariah's gaze softened, but there was no pity in her eyes. "I didn't force you," she replied. "You chose this. You chose to see the truth. And now you're part of it. There's no going back, Jacob. You can't unlearn what you've seen. You can't undo what's been done. The weight of her words sank in like a stone, and Jacob felt the full force of the consequences of his actions. The rules he had lived by, the ones that had defined him, were now shattered. His life, his mission, everything he thought he understood had been altered forever. And as he stood there, his mind swirling with the knowledge of things that shouldn't be known, he realized one painful truth. There was no returning to the soldier he had been. He had stepped into a world where the rules didn't apply, where power and knowledge were both a gift and a curse. And with that realization came the heavy understanding that he was no longer just a soldier. He was something more, something different, and he had no idea where that path would lead. The walls of Jacob's quarters felt like they were closing in on him. The sharp, sterile scent of the base, once so familiar, so comforting now, seemed suffocating. His chest tightened with each breath, his mind racing to keep up with the rapid unfolding of events. It had been days since he shared that kiss with Zariah, and in those days, everything had changed. The weight of the knowledge she had shared with him, everything he had seen, everything he now knew had become a heavy burden. It wasn't just the information. It was the undeniable pull, the strange connection he had to her, a connection that seemed to grow stronger by the day. He had tried to bury it. He had tried to push her from his mind, to focus on his mission, to pretend nothing had happened. But it was impossible. The truth had been unlocked within him, a truth so vast and so dangerous that he couldn't unsee it. His thoughts were consumed by her, by the power she had offered, by the secrets he now held. And then it all came crashing down. Jacob was called into a meeting with his superiors, the very same people who had trained him, who had trusted him with the most dangerous missions. As he stepped into the sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. The stern faces of his commanding officers were unreadable, their eyes cold and distant. Captain Cross, General Hawk's voice cut through the silence, sharp and accusing. You've broken protocol. You've violated direct orders. Jacob's stomach sank, the blood draining from his face. He had known this moment would come. He had known the risks when he crossed that line with Zariah, when he allowed himself to be drawn into the dangerous web of secrets she had woven. But he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. What are you talking about, sir? Jacob's voice was steady, though his heart hammered in his chest. General Hawk slid a datapad across the table to him, the screen flashing with images of Jacob and Zariah, clear footage of their meeting. The images were grainy, taken from a distance, but the unmistakable presence of the alien girl and Jacob's proximity to her was enough to expose everything. We've been monitoring you, the general continued, his voice low and dangerous. We've been aware of your activities. Your unauthorized meetings with Zariah, an alien, have been deemed an act of treason against humanity. Jacob's pulse quickened. He fought to keep his composure, but the weight of the accusation felt like a slap in the face. Treason, betrayal, the very words his training had taught him to fear. He had never questioned his loyalty to his people. But now, with everything he knew about Zariah, about the ancient power she had shared with him, he wondered if loyalty was even possible in this new world he had entered. You've jeopardized the entire mission, General Hawk continued, his voice gaining in intensity. By making contact with Zariah, you've exposed humanity to dangers we weren't prepared for. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? Jacob swallowed hard, the truth of it sinking in. He had made a choice to break the rules, and now the consequences were inescapable. He had seen the future, seen the power that lay hidden within Zariah's people. But in doing so, he had also made himself a target, not just for his superiors, but for something far more dangerous, the Dominion. The Dominion, Jacob muttered under his breath, his thoughts turning to the terrifying force Zariah had warned him about. You don't understand what's really at stake. General Hawk's eyes narrowed. What do you mean, Captain? What do you know about the Dominion? Jacob hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. The knowledge he had gained from Zariah was too dangerous, too volatile to share with anyone, especially not his commanders, who were more focused on control than the truth. But as he looked at their faces, all he could see was doubt, suspicion. He knew they would never understand. They would never see what he saw, feel what he felt. The Dominion isn't just a threat to us, Jacob said, his voice hoarse. They've been manipulating us, watching us from the shadows. They want what I know, what I've learned from Zariah, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. For the first time, Jacob saw a flicker of concern in the general's eyes, though it was quickly masked by a cold resolve. You're suggesting that we've been played? That the Dominion is behind all of this? Jacob nodded. Yes, they've known about Zariah's people for centuries. And now, because of what I've learned, they're coming for us. For all of us. The silence that followed was deafening. Jacob could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. His commanding officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly struggling to process what he had just said. Finally, General Hawk spoke again, his voice low and measured. What are you asking for, Captain? Jacob took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He knew he was walking a fine line now, caught between his loyalty to humanity and the undeniable bond he shared with Zariah. He had broken the rules, betrayed the trust of those who had raised him, but in doing so, he had also uncovered a truth far larger than anything he had ever imagined. I'm asking for a chance, Jacob said, his voice firm with resolve. A chance to warn humanity. A chance to prepare for what's coming. I can help. I can show you everything I've learned, but only if you trust me. The general's expression darkened. You've already betrayed our trust, Captain, and now you want us to trust you with something even more dangerous? You put us all at risk. You've jeopardized the future of humanity. Jacob's heart sank, but he refused to back down. I didn't choose this, he said, his voice steady. But now I'm asking you to listen. There's more at stake than you realize. And if we don't act now, we won't survive what's coming. As the meeting came to a close, Jacob was left with a crushing weight on his shoulders. The consequences of his actions had been swift, brutal. He was being accused of treason, and yet he knew that the real threat lay outside the walls of the base, in the shadows where the Dominion waited. But there was something else growing within him now, a quiet defiance. A part of him had already accepted that his loyalties were no longer to the people who had raised him. No, his loyalties were to Zariah and the path he had chosen. The path that would lead him into a new world, one where the rules didn't matter. And no matter the consequences, he was ready to face it. Jacob stood at the edge of the base's perimeter, watching the stars twinkle coldly above him. The once peaceful expanse of the alien world now felt like a battleground. The air was thick with tension, the weight of impending war pressing down on him like a heavy stone. In the distance, the first signs of the Dominion's arrival were visible. Enormous ships descending from the dark expanse of space, their sleek, sinister forms blotting out the stars. The reality of it all was sinking in. He had always thought that the rules were the foundation of everything. His mission, his loyalty to humanity, had been absolute, a guiding principle that kept him grounded. But now, with Zariah standing beside him, her presence as unwavering as his own, he knew that everything he had believed in was irrelevant. Are you ready? Zariah's voice cut through his thoughts, soft but fierce, like a promise. Her violet eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made the world feel smaller, more intimate. Jacob turned to look at her, the weight of his decision still pressing on his chest. He had crossed a line. He had broken the rules. But with each passing moment, the truth of his choices became clearer. What had once seemed like betrayal to his people now felt like the only path forward. The Dominion, with their twisted motives and ancient power, were closing in on them. Humanity's old ways, those rigid, black-and-white rules, hadn't prepared them for something like this. I never thought I'd be here, Zariah, Jacob said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. Fighting alongside you, fighting for your people's survival, for my survival. The war we're about to face isn't one I was trained for, but it's the one we have to fight. Zariah reached out, her hand brushing against his arm, sending a spark of warmth through him. The path you've chosen wasn't the easy one, she said softly, but it's the right one. You've seen the truth now. What comes next isn't about following orders. It's about understanding the bigger picture. And you're ready for it. The air seemed to grow colder, the distant ships drawing closer. The Dominion wasn't just an alien threat anymore. It was something darker, something that would consume everything in its path if left unchecked. Jacob had never imagined that he'd be standing here, at this precipice, torn between loyalty to his people and an undeniable connection to Zariah, someone whose very existence had once seemed impossible to him. He had broken the rules, and now the cost of that was coming in the form of an ancient enemy that would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But Jacob realized, standing next to Zariah, that his previous life, his old mission, his old loyalties no longer held the same weight. His fingers clenched into fists as he stared at the descending Dominion fleet. His heart was heavy with the realization that the future of two worlds was now in his hands. Humanity had relied too heavily on the idea of structure, on the belief that following the rules would always lead them to victory. But those old rules had failed them. The Dominion was too powerful, too cunning, and humanity had nothing left to rely on but the choices they made now. Zariah seemed to read his thoughts, her eyes softening. She stepped closer to him, their shoulders brushing in a quiet moment of unity. "We're not alone in this," she said. "You and I, our people, your people, we all have to come together now. If we don't, everything we've fought for will be lost." Jacob looked at her, feeling the weight of her words settle in. He had thought that fighting for humanity's survival meant upholding the rules, sticking to the principles that had governed his life. But now, as the Dominion ships filled the sky, those principles seemed so small, so insignificant. Zariah had shown him something greater, something beyond the human race's narrow view of what was possible. She had given him the truth, and that truth had shattered everything he knew about loyalty, duty, and survival. The future was no longer about humanity fighting alone. It was about two species, alien and human, coming together to face a greater threat. The first blast rang out from the Dominion ships, a bright flash that illuminated the dark sky. Jacob flinched, his body reacting before his mind could process it. The war had begun. The enemy was here. He looked back at Zariah, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. "I don't know if we're ready for this," he said, his voice strained. "The Dominion. We have no choice," Zariah interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "This is the battle we were meant to fight, Jacob. You've seen what happens if we don't act. You've seen what they'll do to us." He nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle into his bones. The battle wasn't just about defeating the Dominion. It was about rewriting the future, about choosing what kind of world they wanted to live in. And that choice, the one he had made when he kissed Zariah, had brought them here into a conflict that would shape the fate of both their species. As the second wave of explosions erupted, Jacob felt something inside him shift. The rules, the old ways, everything that had kept him locked in place for so long, no longer mattered. There was no going back now. The world was changing, and he had to change with it. With Zariah at his side, he understood that breaking the rules wasn't a mistake. It was the only way forward. He turned toward the gathering forces of both human and alien soldiers, ready to face the battle that would determine the future of two worlds. The fear that had once consumed him now felt like fuel for the fight ahead. The uncertainty of it all was still there, but it was no longer a barrier. It was a challenge. "Let's do this," Jacob said, his voice steady, the weight of his choice settling on his shoulders like armor. He reached out, taking Zariah's hand in his. The moment they touched, an electric charge shot through him, a silent understanding passing between them. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something far greater. Together, they moved toward the front lines, the air crackling with the promise of war. The fate of two worlds rested in their hands. But as the first volley of fire hit the ground, they both knew one thing. The future was no longer written in the rules of the past. It was theirs to create. And with that realization, the story of humanity and the alien race that had once been enemies was just beginning. The future was uncertain, but Jacob and Zariah were ready to face it together.